Come on in. So excited to have everyone. We will let everyone start entering the
Hi.
chat. We've got a great panel ahead. How's everyone doing? Where's everyone coming from? Write in the chat where you are located. I'm in New York. Elliot's in Atlanta. Goody's in Texas. Rain's in Seattle. Got Chicago, Cali,
Texas.
West Virginia. Amazing. So thank you all for joining tonight's conversation about the pleasure gap. As always, make sure to stay till the end. We will have an amazing prize for one lucky person. And we will have a discount code for everybody. It is NOGAP20 for a discount off of lovers. So NOGAP20. And without further ado, I'd love to introduce the three incredible people that will be joining this conversation tonight. We have Rain Anderson, who is an educator and brand ambassador for the world and for lovers. We're very lucky to have you, Rain. Thank you. We have the physician, Dr. Elliot Harmon. Thank you so much. And if you know Goody Howard, you know that she is this year's ultimate sex educator and a sex ed superhero and sex superhero. And I'm really excited for tonight's conversation around the pleasure gap. So let's just start. What is the difference between the pleasure gap and the orgasm gap? So the three of you, if you were to say the difference, I think we often talk about an orgasm gap, but not so much pleasure gap. So what do you think is kind of the differentiator between the two?
I want to answer first really quick. I think so. The pleasure, hey, Goody Gang. The pleasure gap to me, pleasure. We all often conflate pleasure and orgasm. We make pleasure sexual, and you know how I am about non-sexual pleasure. And so I think when we talk about the pleasure gap, we're talking more about more various forms of pleasure, as opposed to just with the orgasm gap. We're talking about a very specific kind of pleasure, like it's a sexual pleasure. Yeah.
No, I don't want. No.
Uh-oh.
Oh, I'll also good opportunity. Everyone, please make sure you're on mute. Also, this is a safe space. No yucking of yums. Please be kind in the comments. And also, we want to hear from you, so we want this to feel engaging. If you have questions, put them in the comments too. So sorry, Goody.
But no, that was all I was gonna say was, that orgasm gap is a very specific kind of pleasure, whereas pleasure gap, I think, is embracing more various kinds and making more space for pleasure to look different.
Yeah, I'll expand on that a little bit. I think that for me, orgasm gap and pleasure gap are often used really interchangeably. I think like originally when we started to hear about these statistics about cis female women having less orgasms, it's really kind of an umbrella way of approaching that cis women, we're not just experiencing less orgasms, but like less pleasure in general. You can't really talk about the orgasm gap without bringing in the conversation of pleasure. And so the pleasure gap is kind of just like a higher level way of referring to what the orgasm gap was.
Dr. Harmon, what do you think about that?
I mean, I think that throughout the evening, I'm going to get an education myself, but I'd say that the thing that it meant to me most clearly was that one had a discrete endpoint and the other was more kind of a continuum of experience.
I love that, because that is what pleasure is, and orgasm is, it's so often looked as this finality, like if that is the ending, that is what you want to hit, versus this journey that it should be throughout. So Rain, you touched upon some statistics, so I'm going to throw a little statistic at all of you really quickly. So in a recent survey of sexual behavior amongst 52,000 adults in the US, 65% of heterosexual women reported they usually or always orgasm during sexual intimacy, as opposed to 95% of cisgender heterosexual men who orgasm consistently. And that's a pretty wide gap, I'd say. So maybe we can discuss that really quickly. How did we get here? Why do you think, by a show of hands in the comments actually, has anyone ever faked an orgasm or made a sound? I mean, hand raise, or maybe me in the comments. I think that's become almost a norm. It's even in media, we see it, like that's kind of part of our society. So how did we get a lot of me's? How did we get to this point of this gap?
I think there's a lot of reasons we ended up in this place, but one of the predominant reasons that we're here has to do with like our sex education system in the United States and kind of globally as well. So the way that it works is the CDC is responsible for creating like these curriculums for sex education across the United States, but states are not required to actually teach any of that information. So it can be really challenging not only to create a curriculum that I think appeals to a wide variety of different families, but I think it can also be really challenging because we end up seeking out different types of education in lieu of what we would receive in school. So whether we're talking to like friends and family or like watching pornography, I think oftentimes that type of education, as we refer to it, is really saturated in a cis male experience, and it doesn't really do a great job of representing the cis female experience.
Yeah, Goody, I see you nodding.
I would say even like socialization, the socialization, the narrative around sexual pleasure is dick shaped.
Yeah.
So we are often as cis women, not even cis women, trans women too, they're socialized too. You're socialized to that your sexuality is not something that you're supposed to enjoy. It's something that you maintain and nurture for the pleasure of your partner. That's how we're socialized. And so if that's the case, then of course we're going to fake orgasms if we're not feeling it because we don't think we're supposed to. I've had clients that say, oh, you know, it's a 50-50 shot if it's going to feel good or not. Hun. And I had another client in the same conversation because it was a group conversation. And she goes, oh, I thought it was a 50-50 chance it was going to hurt or not. Sis, you know, because, and so we just kind of eat it and just continue to participate in these activities that don't serve us pleasurably because we don't even know how to connect to our own pleasure. We don't even understand that exists. It's something that we maintain for our partners. And even in same-sex relationships, same gender-loving relationships, when women are socialized a certain way, you're still, even if you're with a woman, you're still socializing yourself to your sexuality to serve your partner. And so it's still, even in a same gender loving dynamic, we still perpetuate.
Agree, and I think that there's like a lot of expectation that is tied to it, in what that orgasm means. And so for like cis males, it's really connected to like their virility, and their ability to reproduce, which is this kind of like caveman-esque approach to sexuality. And then like for females, cis females, I think in that instance, it's kind of like an act of service or a form of validating your partner. And those can be really, really problematic ways to approach sexuality.
Right. I think it's also kind of interesting because a lot of the education I've seen usually focuses around either the concept of like abstinence is the only other way to go. And if it's not abstinence, then it's used exclusively for a functionality based kind of approach. And the functionality based approach doesn't involve both parties orgasming. It involves the male orgasming and the woman getting pregnant. And there's nothing else beyond that. So I think that pushing that education like we are today, kind of beyond just functional basis, is pretty important.
I'd even be curious to know, Elliot, what even does the medical training look like around genitals or human sexuality, or even is pleasure even included? Like, what does that even look like? Because that pleasure gap.
The history is long and storied, but I think there's two sides of it. There's what physicians or healthcare practitioners are taught, and then there's what healthcare practitioners are taught to teach their patients. And so in medical education itself, in order to train your physicians, a lot of it's really based more on an anatomical consideration. Like the interactions that you have with patients should be comfortable and happy, but at the end of the day, like the primary importance is understanding the anatomical considerations to these things, but not necessarily like, I don't think any physician necessarily, in order to be a good physician, needs to know how to make a male or female orgasm. But if you kind of dial it way back in history, you can actually find these stories about kind of the invention of the vibrator actually came about from this whole like concept of hysteria being that, you know, they, like the medical community legitimately posited that females have gone crazy because they're not having enough orgasms, which I think at basis is a crazy concept for them to just like mention and then ignore. Also take on the personal responsibility to say that physicians come to the physician and the physician will give you an orgasm. And too many physicians started to develop hand problems. So they this little vibrating device that they could use in lieu of their hands. So that way, you know, these poor overworked physicians stopped having so much musculoskeletal pain. And I think that kind of at its basis just shows that like florid disconnect. Like,
but it shows the acknowledgement of the gap. It shows the acknowledgement of the pleasure gap. These women are not getting orgasms, so we have to medically support.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
But we'll never educate the community. We'll just take this burden upon ourselves and give us you're poor, you're injured, and we'll take care of them. But yeah, it's kind of wild.
Well, when people come in to see you, obviously, like it's typically has to do with some type of physical concern or ailment. But let's say that somebody comes to you for something like low libido. How do you respond to that? What type of information do you use to educate them?
Right. It would actually differ pretty. It would differ on a basic level based on their gender or kind of their desired or presumed gender, because a lot of that comes into kind of the hormonal balances that we look into. And that's usually for us, because we like such an objective measure of things, a good place for us to at least start. You know, consider age, consider where they would fit in their expected demographic, which definitely kind of categorizes people, which might not be what we aim for in society, but at least in medical practice, we have a hard time moving outside of that. From there, you know, for males, we check testosterone levels. They may or may not correlate with actual libido. For females, we check estrone, progesterone levels, kind of see where people fit in the cycle. We'd ask questions about overall sexual productivity. We would actually do a little bit of kind of a psychiatric assessment, you know, evaluate for stressors, ask kind of how it's changed over time, what their baseline is, what their expectations are. And then kind of use a few of those things in order to help kind of guide where we want to move forward with our questioning from there. Obviously, there'd be a physical exam involved, but to be honest, the physical exam wouldn't really work to identify anything other than a huge structural or neurological disorder.
So my question with that would be, I love the you said anatomical considerations. Within the context of anatomical consideration and pleasure gap, if someone comes into you and they're talking about a lack of libido or they're not experiencing sexual pleasure or what have you, do you take into consideration the type of sex they're having?
Yeah, we'll ask those kind of questions. You know, sometimes people are a little bit more forthcoming. A lot of it has to do with kind of the rapport that's developed between, you know, the practitioner and the patient. And sometimes that'll be a conversation that's a little easier to get to earlier on, and sometimes it's a little more difficult of a conversation that's kind of had earlier on in that phase. But yeah, for sure, it's the kind of thing that we talk about. And you know, I think regardless, we usually kind of steer people with the same kind of general advice, which is, you know, engage in something that makes you comfortable, happy, and you feel like could work for you.
Right. I was just curious because when I do trainings for healthcare professionals around this topic specifically, and so I was curious about how you would navigate because I think that the pleasure gap exists also because of the kinds of sex that people are having and the ways that they engage and approach those kinds of sex. So not necessarily who you're sleeping with, but that sex acts that you're performing. And so that's really why I asked that question. But it's amazing to me that when we look at the pleasure gap and we look at women that have P and V, that have insertive sex vaginally, that's where the gap is. People that predominantly engage in insertive vaginal sex, that's where the gap is. People that are engaging in anal sex, oral sex, they're not really having those same gaps. You know what I'm saying?
It's funny that you say that, because I was just kind of thinking that like sometimes our way of interpreting like what a good orgasm is translates to like enthusiasm, and the type of sex that results from that can be really like aggressive. Like the faster I thrust and the faster I like stick my fingers in you, the better it will be. Which is like kind of this weird social result.
Oh my God. But it's true, right? It's like you know, when we think about the pleasure gap and you think about the knowledge of the clitoris and you know that it's a continuing growing organ and how it's present and necessary for sex and pleasure and orgasm, and you think about what we don't know about it. Even when we go around saying there are 8,000 nerve endings in the clitoris, that's not accurate. That's a cow's clitoris. That's a bovine clitoris. It's not necessarily a
What
human
does that
clitoris.
mean to anyone?
Right. What does it even that doesn't
How many nerve endings are in your finger? Like if I told you 8,000 or 8 million, I think you'd be astonished by both of those numbers.
correct? Well, so
But I don't
usually
think
people use
either
it.
of them mean anything to the long term. Like,
Well, to the layperson, we often use it in context of the head of the penis has 4,000 nerve endings, and the clitoris has 8,000. So they use it in a perspective like that.
even better.
But it's still inaccurate because it's a bovine clitoris, and so we still don't even know how those things engage. And so, as much as we don't even know about our body, what the clitoris even looks like, a lot of people don't even know what the what the clitoris even looks like. And so, that gap, when you're not aware of it, you think it's just this one. It's like an iceberg, right? You just think it's that bulb inside the vulva, when it's actually an entire organ into itself. It's just like we don't even know that. And so like Rain was saying with the gap in education, most people think sex ed is teen pregnancy prevention and STI prevention, and it is not. It's not just that. And so because we don't include pleasure, we let media dictate what pleasure looks like for people. You know, beat it up, beat the pussy up, throw it back, knock it out the frame, like the violent ways that we that we talk about what pleasure looks like specifically for pussy owners. It's like, how are we supposed to connect the pleasure with that? Unless that's your kink, because go for yours. But if that's not your kink and that's not what you're into, how do we communicate that and navigate that to close that gap for folks?
Dr. Lori Mintz is like a really fantastic sex educator that Lovers works with sometimes, and she has something that she has said before in the past, that like if people knew more about the anatomy of the clitoris, perhaps there would be less of a pleasure gap. And so, Elliot, I was hoping that you could maybe explain for our guests tonight a little bit about the anatomy of the clitoris and like how you would stimulate it based off of like what we know. And I have this, you guys.
That was my next question, was whether or not you had that.
Yes, I have it in every color.
So I'm going to draw some parallels as I go through this explanation. So the embryological structures that develop into the clitoris and the penis are analogous. So the clitoris itself, you can see the head of the clitoris kind of comes down into those two arms on either side. We call them the crus of the clitoris, which technically means its legs, are all made from the same tissue that actually forms the glands of the penis. And if you actually kind of think of a penis, for those of you that have thought this hard about it, it's actually really three separate tubes. The two of them that sit on what we'll call the dorsal side, so closer to the chest, are similar tissues and kind of made up from the same origin as kind of those two arms that come down from the clitoris. And then the part on the bottom of the male penis, which actually surrounds the urethra in the penis, is made up of that same tissue that forms those other two legs, which are actually called kind of the bulbs of the kind of vaginal opening. So these tissues kind of all come together and form similar functions as well. The glands of the penis would kind of serve a similar function as kind of the head of the clitoris itself. And these things respond to sexual stimulation also in a pretty similar way. You're going to have a vasodilation, which means that all the blood vessels are going to open up. That's going to allow blood to flow into these organs. And as the blood flows into these organs, they'll swell a little bit, producing kind of both the same thing that you'd see both in an erection or kind of during sexual stimulation. You kind of see the clitoris begin to engorge. And you'll see this through both of these tissues on both types of the genitalia, just the same. And then the only other differences as kind of this, what we often will talk about kind of as a folding and enveloping process happens through The embryological development is just that one of them will continue to grow further out and one of them will stay further in. Now, one really important thing here is that the overall tissue developed in a male versus a female is going to end up very different. Like the massive tissue that develops into the clitoris and the entire vaginal opening is going to be much smaller than that of the male. And one of the other ways that this ends up playing out is that kind of access to these structures is also going to be changed and limited. You'll have the foreskin of the male, which is going to be analogous to the hood of the clitoris. And those will both kind of, embryological medicine is a little bit of speculation sometimes, so bear with me. They'll be kind of designed to protect these sensitive organs. And the rest of it will kind of all fall into play. The urethra is going to develop in a slightly different fashion, and kind of the other spaces, the other erogenous zones beyond these, like corpus spongiosum, corpus callosum, are all going to end up with slightly different effects. I think that covers most of it. I know that's a lot of science words. Is there anything I can clarify?
Do you know I wanted to be a doctor when I wanted to be a doctor and a lawyer, and so I was like, oh, so the bulbs turn into the spongiosum, and oh, my brain is so happy right now.
There were a lot of science words in there. So I think like for the general public, I think what I was hearing is that there are a lot more similarities than we give credit to between the penis and the vulva and the ways that they become aroused. And so they're both equally equitable to pleasure, is kind of how I am hearing what you're talking about.
Right, which I think actually brings up a really other interesting and still yet unfully discovered concept, which is that all of these parts of our body that are sensory organs are reflected on our brain in what we call a homunculus, which is kind of like, if you think that you take the whole globe and you roll it all out, you have a map of everything. So anytime you touch one spot on your body, it usually triggers a little neural activity in somewhere in that homunculus. And for both the male and female genitalia, that's reflected into the same small area. And they've looked pretty effectively, or pretty aggressively at least, to kind of see which areas reflect and the total kind of number of neurons devoted to that within the brain. And one of the really interesting things is that they haven't totally sussed this out yet. I'm sure that in the next decade, we'll develop MRI scanners of high enough resolution that we'll be able to kind of piece these things together. But one of the other interesting things that they did kind of come up with is that for some of these parts of genitalia, that it does actually have a small difference. And I think the easiest and most exciting one is that for males, if you touch their chest or their nipples, it'll only reflect on the chest area of the homunculus. But on females, if you touch their chest, it will be on the chest area. But if you touch the nipples, it will reflect both on the chest and in the genital area. So I think that's one of these kind of interesting concepts as we like move forward in our understanding of this and how it all works and kind of what is an orgasm, how do we get to climax. The brain is a complex beast, but it kind of matches some of our underlying suspicions.
I totally feel that. I feel like when I pluck my eyebrows, it makes me sneeze. Like there are like different things that like I can do to my body that will trigger some other type of like response.
Like reflexology in the foot and the hand and things like that.
Yes.
And so I knew that the nipples were connected to the same part of the brain as the genitals. I did not know that it was different for male and female bodies. So yay. But I think too, when we talk about like how Elliot was talking about physical stimulus of the genitalia and the ways that resonates, it is such a small piece on the brain's map. We also limit ourselves, and with the conversation around pleasure and orgasm, with genital centered orgasm. And I think that the pleasure gap would be much more extended and maybe closed if we extended our definition of pleasure, we extended our understanding of pleasure, and we thought and taught to engage the over 18 different kinds of orgasms that exist for the human body, instead of just the genital centered ones.
How about that?
Even in heterosexual sexual encounters, I feel like foreplay is only you know, it's foreplay to have sex. It's never just let's have foreplay, let's go down on each other, let's have these moments of intimacy. And I think also going back, because I'm just so curious about the analogous nature of the clitoris and the penis, how come it takes women longer to get aroused than men? Because on average, doesn't it take women about 20 minutes to warm up and have an orgasm? Obviously, that's a general statistic, and for men, it seems to be faster. I don't know.
I have a theory, but Elliot, I want to know what you're gonna say.
Yeah, I don't know.
Mine would only be theories. They didn't teach
something.
us that in medical school.
Okay, okay.
No.
So I'm gonna say then, since you don't have a theory, I think that it takes longer for women. There's lots of social determinants, but physically, like, you know, speaking specifically about our anatomy, that because the penis and the clitoris are so analogous, they're distributed differently. With the way the blood vessels are oriented in the penis, and they have an outie versus an innie, it's easier to fill that. It's easier for the blood flow to fill that penis than it is for the things that happen in the sexual reaction phase, right? In our the sexual function. When a female body is aroused, you have the elongation of the vagina, the cervix goes up into the body, you have the the wetness that occurs, the clitoral erection that occurs, the nipples sprout out, which happens on both, on all genders, the eye, all the pupils dilate, all of these things happen. And so with male sexual function and reaction, it is, with the penis, it's just the penis, right? It's mainly the center of the penis. But when we, in the spongiosum and all those blood vessels, but when we have a clitoris and a vagina and a vulva, you have all of these other organs and body parts that need blood flow as well. And so it may take a little longer to redirect that blood flow to the parts of the body that need it during arousal.
And also people that menstruate, I think the cycles must have some effect on arousal and orgasm too, I imagine.
And it depends on when, like what part of the menstrual cycle you're in. Where the height, where the cervix is sitting in the vaginal canal, your hormone, like all of that. But men have a pituitary, Dr. Elliott, the pituitary cycle for men, like that takes 90 days for a sperm cell to create. And so there are hormonal changes that happen in that 90-day period that mimics that of a menstrual cycle in women.
I feel like, Goody, you have like a way better understanding of anatomy than I do. So your theory is really intriguing to me. I want to say that it's more cognitively related in terms of like how we process arousal. What's the right answer, Elliot? Tell us which one of us is right, or if neither of us is right.
We could both be right.
Yeah, I think like the important concept in this is both that there are many correct answers and that the answers are tremendously personal. Not personal as in secretive, but like individual. So, I think a lot of that, could we explain it with just one thing? Can we say that it's just hormones? Can we say that it's just anatomy? I think in the end of this, we're going to find that we can't really, but I think that we will find that every one of them does play a part. Maybe just a different amount of a part in different people.
Yeah. I feel like that's us like really wanting to have an explanation for everything, which is kind of similar to why we, use the term orgasm gap to describe it. It's like an oversimplification because we desire answers and we desire results.
So we're getting a lot of questions in the comments about the 18 different types of orgasms. So I'd love to delve into that really quickly. And I know I would love Goody to tap into that.
Oh gosh. Okay. And I just mentioned that casually as if everyone knows what that is. So I apologize for that, y'all. The 18 different kinds of orgasms, when I say orgasm, I'm talking about like that burst and rush of pleasure. So it's not all necessarily genital centered orgasm. So when we talk about orgasm, you have, of course, clitoris orgasm, vaginal orgasm, anal orgasm, oral orgasm. Keep in mind, oral orgasm means reaching orgasm from using your mouth. So if you're performing oral sex or you're kissing or you're, anything like that, using your mouth, you're reaching orgasm, not from receiving oral sex. Nipple orgasm that Dr. Elliott referred to earlier. Well, he didn't say orgasm, but same thing. nipple orgasm. And then you get into the perineum and the frenulum orgasms and the pelvic orgasms for people with penises. And then you got the A spot, G spot, U spot, P spot. You have blended orgasms, mental orgasms, cervical orgasms, birthgasm, sleepgasm, skingasm, blended. Did I say blended? But it's easily 18, and they're always evolving. Breathgasms, which is more tantric, coregasms for the gym rats. So it's very, like Dr. Ella was saying, very individual, very personal. But the way you can start to explore your pleasure instead of, creating just gamified sex that you're just going for the orgasm. If you focus on all the pleasure that you're enjoying during those times, then I think that will also close the gap, because the pleasure gap would be experiencing pleasure with or without a partner in different ways. But you would also maybe come in contact with accessing those other kinds of orgasms as well.
Yes. I love that. And I think, Rain, you touched on this earlier about the depiction of a good orgasm versus a bad orgasm. I'd love us all to talk about that, and what our idea of a good orgasm is, and how that could actually impact negatively our idea of pleasure.
Yeah, I think like the way that we talk about orgasms and the media that we consume that talks about orgasms can be like really misinformative and misleading. But I think that what spawns out of this is kind of a goal-oriented attitude about reaching orgasms, which can be really, really problematic for a few reasons. I think like the first reason that it can be problematic is that it really still perpetuates that orgasm gap by really prioritizing and putting this concept of an orgasm on a pedestal. But also, and probably more relatable for a lot of the people that are here tonight, I think that the problem with this is that oftentimes when you're goal-oriented, it means that you can't focus on the moment, which means you're not focusing on your partner. You're not focusing on all those good feelings that are leading up to this experience, and you're forgetting about the journey that leads you to that destination.
So what do we all think is the problem with a goal-oriented mindset? For those maybe not familiar.
When you gamify sex to reach orgasm, that's the goal, that's the end goal. You miss the journey along the way. Like, I know you guys have heard me use my road trip analogy, right? So in the road trip, you get in the car, like, we're going to orgasm town. We're going to orgasm town. You get in the car, everybody's like, we're going to orgasm town. And then you're focused, the orgasm town, right? And it's like, are we there yet? Are we there yet? We're not there yet. Are we there yet? Right? But when you get on the road trip and you're like, okay, we're going to orgasm town, but you got snacks, you got games, you got music, you have a great road trip, you enjoy the ride, you stop, take pictures at the world's biggest ball of yarn, like, you're doing all the things. You're gonna get to orgasm. You know that's where you're going, but you're not like, and you just enjoy the ride, then the orgasm just pops up on you. It's like, oh, we're here, right? And so you missed all the orgasm, all the little side towns with orgasms in them, because you're so focused on orgasm length. But if you get in the car and you enjoy the ride and you enjoy the pleasure along the way, root yourself sensually in the sex that you're having, experience sex through all 5 of your senses, right? Then you will get layers of pleasure that will close that orgasm gap. And you can have amazing sex without an orgasm. And media does not tell us that. Media does not feed us that. And oftentimes people are passive in the way they experience sex education. So they just eat what they're given instead of actively looking for things. So if you're actively fed the wrong thing, then you're going to have a misconception of what orgasms, like Rain was saying, what orgasms look like, how they feel, sound, taste, smell, all of it.
I agree. I think like also like when we look at the term good, it's really hard to define what good is. I think in like the circumstance of sexuality, good is anything that satisfies you, fulfills you, and that can be a lot more than an orgasm.
And do you think orgasms can differ? Obviously, there's so many kinds of orgasms, but when you're by yourself versus a partner, in terms of intensity and the same.
Oh yeah. Without a doubt. I think like masturbating and partnered sex are so different. Yeah. They feel different. It's a different type of setting. It's a different type of mood and vibe. Okay, I need you to expand on this so I don't get too personal.
I
No,
think too, I have lots of clients that they've realized that they can squirt, which technically every woman that was assigned female at birth has the physical capability to squirt, but they realize they can squirt from solo sex. They they experience their first like orgasm where they just have to like take a nap from solo sex because you're exploring and you're curious. Whereas when you're with a partner, you kind of think you know what you're doing, so you're not. That curiosity is gone. You kind of think you know what it is, and so you're not as intentional about the way you touch and kiss and feel. And when you are by yourself, you're much more focused on what your pleasure looks like and what your needs are. And I think self-pleasure is a great way to close the gap, because when you know your pleasure, you can communicate that to your partners. Because what we fail to realize is my orgasm is my responsibility. It's not your partner's job. They can't they didn't make me come, so they can't come back. It's not their job. It's not their job. It is your job to know what your pleasure looks like, or at least some of what your pleasure looks like, and to be able to communicate that either verbally or non-verbally to the people you're fucking on. They can't read your mind, so you have to be able to guide and you connect to each other through that guidance. But part of that gap is we think, again, because we're socialized to nurture our sexuality for our partners, we think that it's for them. So we don't connect to our pleasure. We don't think that we have one.
That you've said, of which I've had lots of favorite things, but just the idea that, like, the personal onus of responsibility in this and the necessity for communication. And I think that, like, when I look back on what education I received, it really didn't highlight the ability and the desire that everybody has to have a little bit more communication in the process. So I think it's really cool to kind of hear that idea reflected in so many different ways.
I think like one of the other really cool things about masturbation, beyond like the curiosity of it, that is involved, is like it also removes a lot of boundaries that we put in place, like when another person is part of that situation, things that we wouldn't necessarily be comfortable with trying, if there was another person there. So masturbation is a really safe space to explore, and that's what allows us to be so well informed by it.
Yeah, it's like your opportunity to be really honest about your pleasure and kind
Totally.
of test things out. And we talked a little bit earlier. I asked, people in the chat about faking an orgasm, and I think just circling back on that, how dangerous that could be. It's almost you're limiting your own pleasure, your ability to voice your pleasure, and also almost not incorrectly navigating somebody. Like, it might not work for you, and that's okay, but you're making them think that it does work by feigning pleasure.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So,
I think it's community service. A lot of times when you have a partner and you don't reach orgasm and you're just like, oh, that was great, and you just fake the big old orgasm and everything else, they are going to go around thinking that they are doing something like in this kind of one size fits all kind of satisfaction, right? When maybe not. And it's not, again, your orgasm is your responsibility. But if you're not communicating with your partner or partners about what's going on, they're going to think that they're doing it right for you. And so they're always going to think, oh, that was a go-to move right there. So they're going to think that this thing that they're doing is getting you there. And in real life, it may be making you start all over again. You know what I'm saying? So you have to, it's for the community, people. Because even if the relationship or the dynamic or the sex, whatever friend with benefit that you fucking on right now doesn't do it for you, and you don't communicate that, they're going to go to the next person and do the same thing. And we as women need to band together and make sure that we are communicating successfully, so that then they start to expect that from their next partners. And if they don't get it, they ask. That's how you change the trajectory and close the gap.
So
I think it's important too to like highlight the fact that there's a lot of reasons why people will fake orgasms. So like we had talked a little bit about how we can do that sometimes to validate our partners. And I think what Goody was really talking about just now is kind of something that I used to do when I was a lot younger, which is I would do it to speed up the process, thereby actually removing my ability to communicate how I could have made it more pleasurable for myself in the process, which is really, really counteractive. So you may think you know, well, I don't do it for this reason, so that's, you know, that's better than the other. But there is no positive reason. If you're faking an orgasm, something is not clicking, something's not connecting.
Correct. I think a lot of times too, people think that when they're not having sex, like they go to sex therapists, they go to sex educators, sex consultants, sexologists, etc. When they come to us, the issues that they're having in the bedroom are just an illustration of the issue that they're having upright with clothes on. And so we can't also negate the fact that sometimes the pleasure gap is because you have some issues or some challenges in your romantic relationship that are manifesting themselves or showing up in the bedroom. And like, if you go to bed at 10 o'clock and your partner is up playing the game or whatever, and they come in at 10:30 knowing knowing you sleep, and you just fake the orgasm so you can go to bed in peace. You know what I'm saying? Like,
We all been there. Come on, you guys.
Like, I go to bed at 10 o'clock. If you need to get in this bed when I get in the bed, and you can get up and go play the game later. You know what I'm saying? We go to bed at 9:30. You know what I'm saying? Like, but so you're absolutely like, Rain, I love what you said about this. Like, there's more than one reason to fake one, or if you feel like you need to fake one, there's really no good reason, but there are lots of reasons. And so you do a disservice to yourself, you do a disservice to your partners. You know, I mean, the benefits of orgasm, the health benefits of orgasm, you're doing yourself a disservice. You're gonna have to go see Dr. Elliott way more often, because
and he doesn't have any of those vibrators for to help you out.
no more.
So.
That's illegal now. That's a lawsuit now.
Practically, I think you'd lose your license these days.
You know, it's frowned upon.
Go to lover stores, you guys. Go to lover stores.
So how can, so in closing the gaps, also, it just occurred to me, the one size fits all, like Goody, and every panel will just throw something in that will just like resonate with me. I'll be thinking about this for a long time, because I often hear, oh, they're good in bed. Are they good in bed technique, or they're good at listening? They're a good communicator. They're good. That just occurred to me, because so often that's, my girlfriends and I will chat about it, like, yeah, they were so good in bed. It's like, but why?
Right. What makes it good? Is it choreography? Is it stamina? Is it equipment? Is it performance? Is it script? Vocabulary? Is it, does he choke you right? Because there's a right and wrong way to choke somebody, people. It's when you say good in bed, it's relative. Just like the concept of normal is relative, the concept of good is relative. So somebody saying it's good, what's good for me may not be good for you. And so we have to say, oh, he was a great communicator, and, very patient and loving and attentive, and, use your words. And I think this may be a little off topic, but I don't use the phrase I love you in romantic settings, in romantic relationships. I tell my kids and my friends and my family I love them all the time, but I don't tell my romantic partners I love them, because when you say I love you, you stop telling people why you love them and what you love about them. You just use the I love you blanket, right? And so when you say good in bed, it's a blanket. It's not why they're good in bed and what they're doing. And so using your words, because language is alive and it lives in and on people, right? Using your words and explaining what makes them good or not is important, because that's how you grow.
You have the most beautiful analogies. I love it.
Thank you.
And I think
my love language is words of affirmation. So I love language and words, and I'm very orally fixated too. So it just feels good in my mouth.
No, and I think in almost every conversation we have related to pleasure, the cornerstone is always communication. So I think hopefully, like, from this conversation, if you could walk away with anything from tonight, it's that use your words, listen to your body, and don't be afraid to express that. So maybe we could talk about that a little bit. What are some helpful tips for people that want to close the pleasure gap, that want to hone in on their own pleasure, but don't even know how to state their feelings and how to get there?
I have some amazing news for each and every one of you guys here tonight, is that you're already closing the pleasure gap by being a part of this conversation. Yes, having a dialogue about pleasure is the first step. And I know that it can feel really uncomfortable and maybe sometimes even a little bit inappropriate based off of our upbringings and all of that. But it's a really important thing to do, a really important step to take if we wanted to start dismantling some of the stigma around pleasure.
Yeah.
Oh,
I just unmuted myself. I'm sorry. Also, I like to just kind of add to that if you have that verbal conversation, it's also I call it a shit sandwich, right? So you tell them what they do that you like, and then you tell them what they do that you kind of don't, or what or something that you would like in other than or in addition to, and then you follow up with another positive reinforcement tactic. So you got to give them. You can't just say, "Hey, no, I don't like that. Don't do that."
With
Make
my
sure you do.
coworkers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Think about like that. Like you talk to a coworker. Like if you positively reinforce the things that you do enjoy, right? And like I said earlier, being sensual in your sex. So when you're sensual in your sex, you're paying attention to if your partner holds their breath in anticipation, or how they relax their body when they moan, enjoyment, and things like that. So you're paying attention. But if you are giving positive reinforcement for the things that they're doing that you like, and then you can maybe gently guide them physically for the things that maybe they don't like. Like if you don't like how they're touching you, like if you have a vulva and they're like just really just I mean meat puppets, it's just bad, then you can just kind of put your hand over their hand and show them how you like to be touched. And then it may be a little theatrical, but be even more positively reinforcing about that, or like kiss them and nod yes while you're kissing them, or like I like this, or something very soft and sensual, but you're still physically guiding them to what you enjoy. So don't make it about, no, you suck, this is wax sauce, this is because your orgasm is your responsibility. And if you center your feedback in positive reinforcement, because male fragility, sorry, Dr. Elliott, male fragility is a thing. So just positive reinforcement will get you a lot further. You get more bees with honey than shit. So just know that, talk to them how you would want them to talk to you. And also you can even flip it and go, and so is there anything that I could do differently? Or is there anything that I do that you specifically enjoy? Because then you make it a conversation and it's not like a meeting in the principal's office.
Totally. I think like one thing that I often do with my partner, and this may be a little bit like progressive of a technique, but like we will actually like structure time for feedback, which is kind of weird, but because there's like a allotted time for it, it means that we're mentally prepared to hear both positive and negative feedback. And so it's a little bit less personal that way, I think, because we come to the table like ready to improve. And so that can be something that you can try with your partner, kind of help aid in some of that communication.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to keep asking, and never be afraid to dumb it down. Another great analogy was like, even when you expect that somebody knows everything, it's amazing how little they can know. When we were in anatomy lab as medical students, we'd always have to review whatever we were going to work on in anatomy lab the day prior. So you'd look at everything in the textbook, you'd go over it a few times, you were aggressive about it, and your cadavers are either male or female. And I had a male cadaver, so one of the other classmates, who was a guy, brought me over and said, like, I have a female cadaver, you show me mine, I'll show you yours. And I show him mine, and he starts to show me his, and he's like, yeah, but mine doesn't have a clitoris. It has everything else, though. To which I was like, wait, there it is. So, like, a lot of intense study, and you can still easily be behind the ball on some of these things.
Oh, the joke of the male doctor not being able to find the clitoris is just hilarious to me. You can't make this stuff up. That's hilarious to me.
It was good.
That's why you guys shouldn't feel bad, I think that right there is the perfect story. If you're ever feeling that you're lacking information and need more education, just remember that story and reflect on it, you guys.
Whole medical doctors out here can't find the clitoris. So don't forgive yourself. Give yourself some grace.
Yeah, there's no shame in trying.
And I'm seeing a lot of great literature in the comments. We have She Comes First and Come As You Are. Or I've seen
Both
that
of those. Yeah, excellent choices. Highly recommend.
Yeah. And I love, and Goody, I think you mentioned this before on another panel or in a conversation that we've had before with lovers, but how it shouldn't just be in the bedroom. The conversation should be in your everyday. And that's why I love the idea of pleasure gap, not orgasm gap. How do you create this, this holistic approach to the way you feel? If you wanted to touch on that a little bit, because I just love the idea of continuously talking about it throughout your day.
I mean, you said it. Like that's what it is. And I love what Rain said about like having time set aside too, because then you do kind of take your feelings out of it because you're having a meeting. It's business now, so you cannot take it personally, you know. But having those ongoing conversations is not one set moment on your life's timeline where you're like, yes, this is where I became, you know, this person that closed the orgasm gap for myself. It's not a set point in the lifespan. It's going to be something that's ongoing because our bodies are always changing. Our hormone levels are always changing. Just like your taste for food changes, your palate evolves and all that. You don't have a 4-year-old's palate anymore. Like chicken nuggets and ketchup can be like, you know, a treat. You know what I'm saying? But no one is just eating that every day. You know, so you evolve. And so just like your palate for food evolves, your sexual palate and your sexual scripts evolve, and your pleasure scripts evolve. And so it's a continuum, and it's just a constant, continuous conversation to have. And it's something you can like do with your clothes on. You can just kind of play and physically like touch your partner, walk through all the love languages with your partner, and just kind of evolve and see how y'all flow together and connect with all of that. And then Ann Hotter Ship. She just did a ebook that has like 18 love languages in it for like the modern day. Like it's some sort of revision, like remix, and it's like 18 different ones because she hadn't like sussed them out. I haven't had a chance to read it yet. I bought it, but I haven't had a chance to read it yet. And I think something like that can kind of improve your general engagement with your partner, because it's not just about the sex part. It's about all the other parts of the relationship that may be having challenges, and that's where it shows up, is in the sex.
Mhm. Yes.
I think there's like some relearning too that we have to do when it comes to the pleasure gap. Even with myself, I find that like it's my instinct to still say orgasm gap, even though I can acknowledge that pleasure gap is a better term to use, all-encompassing term. We still have to teach ourselves and learn, you know, that the things that we learned socially and culturally are not maybe the best way to go about things and approach things. So keep that in mind. I struggle with it as well. And I am up here talking and representing Lovers Brand. So, you know, everybody, no matter who you are, will have challenges with this, and that's part of the journey.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. And how do we continue? And I think we've touched upon it a little bit, but continue to hold ourselves accountable and our partners for this in a safe and balanced place.
I don't know that accountability makes it kind of feel like work. But I think exploring and expanding the self-pleasure aspect, communicating, navigating, you know, consistently checking in, yes, you know, kind of thing. It feeds that fire. Don't be afraid of lubricant. I think the pleasure gap too, people think that lubricant is a commentary on your sexual performance. I don't care if you are Miss Aquafina 2021 and you squirt across the room. That shit hit different with the ceiling fan on. And you need a little bit of lubricant. I'm not talking about like, you know what I'm saying? I'm just saying a little taste, you know, just to put a smoother ride between you and whoever or whatever you're fucking on, because it gives you that glide, and it reduces that friction, because again, your natural body's moisture is designed to evaporate, and lubricant is not. So some of the pleasure gap may be you don't have enough, you got too much friction, or you got, you know, you don't have enough slip, or the ceiling fan is on too high. And I'm in Dallas, Texas. It's too hot to be trying to fuck under some covers to hide from the ceiling fan, and we not cut it off because it's hot. So y'all see it, get your little lubricant. We're not gonna say what brand it is.
Lovers.
Go to Lover stores and use No Gap 20 and get you some lubricant, because my Lover's lubricant is in a different part of my house. But that's something different. But go to Lover stores and use No Gap 20 and get you some lubricant. It is your friend.
But Goody, such a great point, because people think any supplement, any lube, any vibrator, any toy, even people might view that as, oh, I'm not good enough. I'm like, what I have isn't good enough. So I think we're getting that stigma, especially with toys.
Yep. And life hack, you know, those you can go to Amazon and get like a little automatic hand sanitizer dispenser. They have some really cool. Put your lubricant in it and put
You
it on the
just
side.
blew my mind. You just blew my mind.
Always.
Sex and tech, baby. Get you an automatic hand sanitizer dispenser, put lube in it, and put it on the side of the bed. It doesn't look like lubricant. It's just some cool shit sitting on the nightstand. And you could just reach over and you and just put your hand under the little and get to going.
The sensor activated, yes.
It'll give you the right amount and everything. Get bougie with your lube.
Oh my
Like,
God.
you know, I'm gonna do that now. So
Listen, it's free game. Free game. Like, and it's cool looking. Like, they have some really cool looking ones. You can have an LED light joint. Like, it makes it sexy. And it's like, when you do it, was that lube? Did you just, okay. You know what I'm saying? Like, do that. It is amazing.
I love that. And eventually the sound will start to, you know, sync up with you becoming aroused. So
That's incredible. Okay, so and also don't forget, everyone, there's a discount code, no gap 20 for your
yes.
and for your vibrators or whatever toys you want to do. And unfortunately, no Amazon discount, but hopefully you can find some goody approved.
Listen, I'm gonna add it to like my Amazon affiliate. I'm gonna go put some on there.
You must. That's honestly genius. So in short, where do we go from here? So I think having these conversations, what do we want people to walk away with? How do we close the gap or start shrinking the gap?
I think, like, for me, what I would like people to walk away with tonight is that you all have access to pleasure, and that this is a concept that does exist, that this is a challenge and a stigma that does exist out there that we need to acknowledge. I think that's the most important thing to walk away with tonight. But I also hope that you feel excited about attending other panels and workshops with lovers so that you can learn a little bit more about your sexuality and feel more comfortable with helping to close the pleasure gap.
Yes, keep talking, stay humble, and take pride in your work.
Take pride in your work.
Goody, what do you think?
You know, I say pleasure is a birthright, and it's for all of us. And I think that, again, the global conversation around pleasure is dick shaped. So take up space. We want to be feminist and equity and all of that, and womanist and all of that. Take up space in the bedroom too. It's all encompassing.
That's beautiful. Thank you. And we have a winner, and the winner will get an amazing prize. The winner is, drums, Avery Man. You are the winner.
Come on down.
Yay, Avery.
Congratulations, Avery. These swag gifts are super awesome.
Yes.
Yeah.
They are amazing. Lover stores are amazing gift givers.
Thank you. And as always, we want your feedback. We want to hear what you want to talk about, what you want to learn about. So follow us on Instagram, DM us what you want to see and hear and talk about, because we are your place for pleasure. That is what we do. So I want to thank Rain and Elliot and Goody and all of you for taking time tonight. And hopefully this is the first of many conversations, and we'll be closing the gap very soon.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you
so
all.
much.
Missy. Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
Thank you. Have a wonderful night and stay safe, everybody. And we'll see you next month.
thanks.
Bye.
See you next month.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.